All right. How's it going, everybody? My name is Nick Mihailovski. I'm here with Andrew Wales and Pete Frisella. We're on the Google Analytics Developer Relations team. Today, we're really excited to talk to you about cross-device optimization using Google Analytics. We changed the title last minute, so don't worry. You guys are in the right presentation. We have an awesome presentation for you today. Today, we're going to talk about three big things. We're going to talk about how you can measure beyond the web and app with Google Analytics. We have an amazing presentation about how you can optimize experiences across devices. And finally, we're going to tie this all together with how you can measure online and offline experiences together, all using Google Analytics. So, let's begin. Today, we're in the middle of a once-in-a-lifetime technology explosion. Wow. Take a look at St. Peter's Square. Take a look at the scene in 2005. There's one person on a cell phone. And I think it's a flip phone. Like, who uses a flip phone today? Now fast forward to 2013. There's a million devices, many different devices that people are using. What's amazing is that these devices are different. You see tablets, you see smartphones. In fact, at the end of the day, people are using more devices than ever before. And our data shows that within the United States, 90% of users have 3 or more devices. So I want to take a quick poll here. Raise your hand if you have, personally, 3 or more devices. That's a huge amount of people. Now keep your hand up. I want to see who has the highest number of devices. Keep your hand up if you have 4 devices, 5 devices, 6, 7, 8, wow, 9, 10, 11, 12. Maybe 15? 20 devices. Saying 2 people, a couple people? 25 devices? Wow, you guys definitely are all winners. Come by our booth after this. We'll give you cool little Google Analytics Android bots. The fact of the matter is, as you saw, everybody's using many devices. So something else magical happened in 2005. Can anybody guess what it is? That was the year we launched Google Analytics. And so when we launched Google Analytics, we built a piece of tracking code for the web that included a lot of client logic. And that data got sent to Google Analytics using something we call the UTM.gif. A couple years later, we launched V1 of our application tracking. What we had to do is we had to port all that client logic and the complexity into Java and into Objective-C to support our Android and iOS SDKs. As we look to the future, what we really wanted to do is support measuring users across any devices. And so because it was so complex to port our code, we completely rewrote our infrastructure for collection. And we released something what we call the measurement protocol. And we released this maybe a couple months ago. And the measurement protocol is an easy-to-use way to send data to Google Analytics from any devices. So all of a sudden, you now have a way to measure interactions with game consoles, set-top TV box, even point-of-sale system, pretty much any sort of places where you have user interactions. So let me quickly explain to you how the measurement protocol works. But before we get into that, we really need to understand the Google Analytics data model and what we're trying to represent. At its core, Google Analytics represents how users interact with content. For example, this lovely lady here is buying flowers for her boyfriend. In this scenario, the user is the lady, and viewing the product page for flowers is the interaction that we'd want to track. So to measure this interaction with Google Analytics, there's 3 pieces of information we need. One is we need to identify the tracking ID, which defines the Google Analytics account you have. 2, you need to identify what we call the client ID. And this represents an anonymous user. We represent it with the CID value. And finally, we need to represent the interaction. And we represent it what we call the HID type. Within Google Analytics, there's many different HID types. There's page views, events, transactions, items, so forth. So these 3 values map into a request to the measurement protocol. The protocol is actually an HTTP request to this endpoint googleanalytics.com collect. You send a GET request. You specify a version. And then you have the 3 values. You have the TID, which is your UA number. You have the CID, which is the anonymous user ID. You have the HID type. In this case, is a page view. And finally, is flowers. It's that easy. And to send this data, if I go back into the screen here, in the back here, I have Google Analytics real-time report. And so all I need to do is grab this URL, open a browser window, hit enter, hopefully if everything works, boom, we see the data directly in the real-time reports. That's how easy it is to send data to Google Analytics. Now, the user interaction model is super flexible, and the measurement protocol is really easy to use. So you can take this model and apply it to many different scenarios that might not even have to do with websites. For example, here's my Google employee badge. Inside of it is an RFID chip, and on the chip has my employee ID. That represents the user. Now here I have an RFID reader. And the reader is hooked up to Google Analytics through this little app here. So when I scan my badge over the reader, with any luck, boom, I see the data directly in real-time reports. Now what's even more amazing about sending data from any device, what's really cool about this, let's just go back to my presentation here. What's really exciting is that demo only took 5 lines of shell script. That's how easy it was to send. So now anybody can send data to Google Analytics from any device. All right, enough fun and games. Let's look at a real-world application. In fact, let's take a look at how the Chrome DevRel team at Google uses the measurement protocol to measure their app, Yeoman. So what is Yeoman? Yeoman was inspired by Ruby on Rails. And the Rails framework makes it really easy with a command line script to add a couple commands and get an entire Ruby web application. So the Chrome DevRel team, because of the plethora and growth of all these different JavaScript frameworks, wanted to provide a simple command line tool so developers can write a couple commands and they could build all the structure of the framework of their modern web applications. So here's a screenshot of the tool. And what the developer relations team wanted to understand was how many people are actually using this tool. So when they started looking at the problem, the first question came to mind, the first thought, they're like, yeah, we'll use App Engine. App Engine's powerful, it's easy, it gives us all the power. But when they started looking at the problem of what they had to solve, they had to write a collection to collect logs. They had to write some asynchronous tasks to process those logs into reports. They had to build a front end to display all the reports, and potentially even get into some visualizations to make it all look pretty. Now that's a lot of work. And when we showed them the measurement protocol, it was very easy to see why using Google Analytics in the protocol would save them so much time and be so much easier. So they implemented the measurement protocol in this application, and when users actually use the app for the first time, they're prompted with a simple little opt-in to collect anonymous data to Google. When a user approves that, we create a random ID that gets stored on disk, and that's what we use for the client ID. Now every command that the user uses is actually sent as an event to Google Analytics. So all of a sudden, they could log into the report and see exactly how many people are using their app. And this is huge. This is huge because they're not tracking installs, they're tracking active users using the unique visitors metric. In fact, this is one of the most popular things they use during performance review time because they can actually quantify the impact their team has on growing the adoption of this product. What's nice about this is Google has a lot of features out of the box. Google Analytics does. And so one of the business questions that they have is what are the actual impact of their outreach efforts? And so the team actually goes around the globe, speaks at many events like I/O. One of the events is called G Kenya, and it's actually part of our Africa outreach event. And at one of those events, they talked about the Yeoman product, and so they were curious, like what was the lasting amount of people who actually used the product? And here, directly in analytics, they can now tell whether that event was effective. Effectively, they're using Google Analytics to tell people that they should travel around the world. It's pretty amazing. And finally, they're using analytics to show what are the actual applications people are using and frameworks. And this is great, because when they start looking at their development cycle and saying, where should I focus my time and effort, they can see what were the top languages people used, and then incorporate these as the default settings so people don't actually have to download them independently. So the measurement protocol with Google Analytics gives the developers of any application the ability to measure how users use their application. With that, I want to turn it to Andrew to talk about cross-device optimization.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. So Nick just showed you how you can send data to Google Analytics from pretty much any connected environment really easily using the measurement protocol. And that's really awesome. In this next section, I want to show you some things we're working on to make it easier for you to actually analyze that data and to build better cross-device experiences for your users. So I want to start with user ID. Now, you saw in Nick's demo, when he was sending those hits with the measurement protocol, he was using a field called the client ID, or CID. And this has been around in Google Analytics for a while. Basically, it's an anonymous ID that represents a single user on a single client device. So if I'm using your web app on my smartphone, I have one client ID that represents me using that phone in GA, Google Analytics. Now, if I access your site on a desktop, I'm going to get another client ID, a unique one that GA is going to use as well. And this is going to keep going. So if I use your web app on 5 different devices, I have as many as 5 different unique client IDs in GA. Now, this can be fine if you want to do analysis of my experience with your app on one device. So if you want to say, OK, how's Andrew using my app on a desktop? That's fine. No problem. You can definitely do that. Where it gets tricky and where we run up against a little bit of a barrier is when you start asking questions about how is Andrew using my product across all these different devices? For example, how many devices in total do I use to access your app? How much revenue do I generate across all of my devices for you? This is where client ID starts to feel a little bit like some walls that we run up against in analytics today. So we're introducing a brand new ID called user ID. And the difference here is that user ID is going to represent a single user across all of their devices. And with that user ID, we can start to break down those walls and start to answer some of these really cool cross-device questions. Let me show you a really simple example of how this is going to improve GA reporting. So let's say Pete's using my web app on his smartphone. And you can see here, GA has generated for him a unique client ID. And in my reports, he's considered one unique visitor. Now, this is fine. All's well and good until Pete decides he wants to go get himself a tablet. Good for Pete, but bad for me. Because now when he uses my app, he's got a new client ID, right? It's unique. And GA is saying, great, now I've got 2 unique users. Well, I know there's actually only one Pete. He's irreplaceable. But he's using 2 devices. And as this continues on, Pete gets more and more devices. He shows up as more and more unique visitors in my reports. And this gets to be a problem, because I actually only have 1 user, but here it's saying I have 3. So let's do this again using user ID. So now Pete's using my app on his smartphone. And when he signs in, because this is actually a signed-in experience, when he signs in, I'm going to take his user ID from my auth system, and I'm going to send it to GA in this new UID field. And I'm going to do the very same thing when he does this on his tablet and when he does it on his laptop. And you can see as he keeps accessing my app, the number of unique visitors stays the same, because GA now understands this is one user with 3 different devices. So user ID, it's going to enable cross-device reporting. It's really best for signed-in experiences, so where you have an auth system that has an ID that's stable, that represents a particular user across all these different devices. And that ID has to be non-personally identifiable. And this is really important, because you can't send personally identifiable data to Google Analytics. So please, for example, don't use my social security number and send it into GA. That is not a good idea. Don't do it. And it's really easy to actually do this. So this is an example using our Analytics.js library, which is our new JavaScript library that's built on top of the measurement protocol. And we've kind of abstracted out the complexities of auth. But most of the work in GA is being done with just this one line, this set API, where you can just say, if you have a user ID, if somebody's signed in, you can get it and set it to this UID parameter. And now when you send this page view, it's going to send that UID along with it. It's pretty straightforward. So you've seen how it's really easy now to send data from any connected environment using the measurement protocol. And I just showed you how you can use user ID to have this idea, this notion, representation of a user across all their different devices. Now I want to show you some new reports we're working on to help you actually analyze all this data and to do some pretty cool optimizations. I want to show you 3 reports. The first is the device overlap report. Second is the device paths report. And the third is the acquisition source report. So I'm going to start with the device overlap report. And this is brand new, by the way. This is a sneak peek. We've never shown it before, so I'm very excited to show it to you today. So the device overlap report is all about allowing you to segment users and outcomes, like conversions, revenue, by different device combinations. So let me show you what I mean. So suppose Nick is using my app on his tablet. Then he moves to the desktop, and he uses my app there as well. And he actually does an in-app purchase for $3.99. This is great. Great for me. If you looked in GA, if you did this without using user ID, and you looked in GA before these new cross-device reports, you might see something like this, where you see Nick represented as 2 unique visitors. And if somebody asks you, well, what's the value of tablet here in this interaction? You look at this report, and it's really hard to figure out what the value was. You would be totally reasonable in saying, tablet really doesn't have much value here. We should get more desktop users, right? Because that guy spent $3.99. It's actually the same person, but we can't tell that. So you're missing a little bit of the picture there. Now let's do this again with user ID and cross-device measurement. It's actually Pete. So Pete's actually signed in now, and I'm sending Pete's user ID. Now with the new device overlap report, look at the difference. We're able to say you actually had just one user. They used a combination of desktop and tablet, which is actually what happened. And that combination of desktop and tablet led to $3.99 in revenue. So if somebody asks you what's the value of tablet, you can say, well, this is great. Actually, in combination with desktop, it produced $3.99 in revenue. So that's the device overlap report. Allows you to segment users and outcomes by device combinations. Next, I want to show you the device paths report. This report's all about segmenting users and outcomes by device paths. So not overlap this time, but paths. So let me show you what that means. So I just showed you how you can now use combinations of devices as segments, right? So we were able to see that Pete used both desktop and tablet. That's pretty cool. Wouldn't it also be cool if you could segment by paths? So not just the fact that Pete used both together, but that he moved from one to another in a specific order. And what could you learn from that? So that's the device paths report. This is brand new. We've really never had anything quite like this in GA before. And what you'll see here on the left, this is the sequencer view. You'll see all the top paths users are taking across different device types. And then on the right side, you'll see all their engagement metrics, including outcomes like revenue, transactions, et cetera. Now, one of my favorite features, let me back up. One of my favorite features about this report, so I'm really interested in revenue, right? As probably most people are who have apps that are out there. I'm really interested in the paths that actually lead up to transactions because I want to try to maximize the number of people I can drive through those most profitable paths. So using the sequencer options, I can say, just show me all the paths that led up to a transaction. I'm just interested in those. And I'm actually here, I'm only going to see the last 2. So when we do that, this is what we get. And look at that third row there. This is actually pretty cool because we can see that this specific path, when people move from desktop to tablet, this is ridiculously profitable for me. Look at that revenue, the number of transactions. This is really awesome. One of the things I might do after looking at this is to create a promo on the desktop that says, hey, if you have a tablet, come check us out on the tablet. Because I know when people move from desktop to tablet, they're more likely to purchase. And when they do purchase, they purchase a lot more. Just one example of the insights you can pull out of the device paths report. And again, this is all about segmenting users and outcomes by device paths, not combinations. One last report I want to show you. It's the acquisition source report. This report's about getting true acquisition value by device. And once again, this has really never been possible in GA before today. So let me run through another scenario. So Nick's using my app. I only have 2 users, Nick and Pete. It's hopefully some of you, maybe later. So this app's being used by Nick. He makes a 99-cent purchase. Then he uses my app on a tablet. And he makes a $2.99 in-app purchase. It's fantastic. And he loves this so much that he actually makes a $14.99 in-app purchase on the desktop. This is great. Now, if we looked at this in GA today without using user ID, without using any of the new cross-device reports, we might get a report that looks like this, right? We've got 3 unique visitors. They're split across desktop, tablet, and mobile. And if somebody were to ask you, well, what's the acquisition value of tablet, right? Or sorry, of mobile. You look at this report and you say, well, we acquired 1 user from mobile and they made a 99-cent purchase, right? So it's not nothing, but it's not a lot. And you might actually say, well, desktop generated $14.99. So maybe that's the better acquisition channel, right? Maybe we should try to get people coming through on desktop instead of mobile. Let's do this again using user ID and the new cross-device reports. So here's the same interaction. And now Nick is signing in. So I'm sending his user ID to GA. And here's what we get with the new acquisition source report. We're able to see that there was just one user, that we acquired them through mobile. And here's the really cool part. We can see that on the originating touch point, which was that original mobile phone, we generated 99 cents in revenue. But the really awesome thing is now we can see, because we have user ID that's tying all this together, we can see on all these other touch points, all these other devices, Nick actually spent $17.98 more incremental. So now when somebody asks you, well, what's the acquisition value of mobile? You can say, well, it's 99 cents, but then they went off and spent $18. This is actually a really great acquisition channel. You'd have the exact opposite conclusion, right? This actually does work. It's just that you couldn't really see it before. But now with user ID and the acquisition source report, you can. So acquisition source, get true acquisition value by device. So just to summarize what I've covered so far, user ID, it enables cross-device measurement in Google Analytics. It should be non-personally identifiable. Let me say that again, non-personally identifiable. And right now it's in a limited pilot, and we'll have more details about when it's coming to you guys pretty soon. I also showed you 3 new cross-device reports. And these are going to enable cross-device analysis, and they're all built on top of using user ID. And these reports are coming soon, and we're going to have some more information for you soon about when you can expect those. Cool. So now I want to pass it off to Pete, who's going to talk a little bit about measuring online to offline.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. All right, so Nick gave us some really cool demos with the measurement protocol, and you can do some really awesome things with the measurement protocol. It's pretty exciting. Andrew's introduced user ID, which allows us to do the cross-device measurement. So I'm going to take a look now. Let's put these things together and see how we can use that to actually combine online with offline measurement. So why does online to offline measurement important? Like, why do we care? Well, if you think about the way people interact and the way users interact with your business or your services these days, a lot of times they'll start the online interaction and then actually conclude in an offline world. So maybe they will do some research online, look at a product they really enjoy, and then visit the store and make the purchase there. So when you think about a lot of these situations, like in retail where this happens, how do you get those two to connect, and how do we find that path from the online campaign all the way through to that final purchase, right? So this is important, and it's not just for retail. There's things like maybe someone purchases a ticket online, and then they visit the event, the venue, and they use the ticket there. Or perhaps they've purchased something and then returned it and come back again. So these offline and online interactions are taking place all the time, right? So from a customer perspective, you want to know that particular path. So when you think about the measurement problem, and why this is important and how it looks today, this is a very basic and simple report, but it tells a story. If you were to ask somebody, based on what you see here, what's the outcome or what do you think happened for this particular set of campaigns, I think the likely conclusion would be, well, they all seem to perform reasonably well, but they're all kind of the same. They're all generated around $25,000 or so in revenue. So if you were to follow up and ask, okay, well, is there any particular campaign we should probably pay more attention to? Maybe one that we want to optimize or spend more money on. It'd really be difficult to find this, to determine this. But we just talked about how a lot of times you have online interactions that end up concluding offline. So we know that data is out there and it exists. So we probably want to make decisions for that complete story, not just this online story. So in that sense, what you really want is probably something that looks like this, right? Where you have your offline and your online revenue together in one place. And now you have a completely different story, right? If you ask those same questions again, what do you think happened here? What campaigns perform really well? Now you see there's something that happened here that wasn't apparent before, is that one of your campaigns generated a large amount of offline revenue, right? And now you can say, well, what should we spend more time on? And the answer is a lot more clear now. We should probably look at the newsletter in May. I don't know what we did there, but something generated a lot of offline revenues, right? So this makes a lot of sense, right? We want to know these two combined to give us some good optimization. possibilities and what the actual paths that are people taking from online to the offline. Everybody kind of gets this, understands this, but we really want to be able to have this data in GA. So let's look at how we do this. How do we actually implement something like this using what we know about the measurement protocol and the client and user ID? So the first thing we want to do is step back and think about the user ID and this client ID concept, right? So which one should you use to implement online to offline? There's two things to think about. The first thing is, do you have a consistent way to identify the user? And this goes back to what Andrew was talking about, the user ID, right? So if you do have a consistent way to identify a user, maybe through an sign-on or an auth system, then you want to use user ID. So when that's available, use user ID. And that's going to be a stable ID that you have and provide. So it could be an auth system, it could be like a loyalty card or something. It's just a way to identify that user. If you don't have that, then you can still do this. You just want to use the client ID. And we have a mechanism that allows you to extract that client ID that we've set for you through Google Analytics. Right. Okay, so now we understand maybe which ones we should use. Let's look at how we'd actually implement this on a real-life scenario using user ID. So the scenario is we have a retail store, daily deals, and there's an online component in this offline purchase. Right? So typically you'd see something like a user visits a site. They would sign on, and when they do that, we would know what user this is. Like, who does this belong to, this account? We'd have that information. So we have a user ID. They would maybe browse the site a little bit, look around to see what they enjoy. Maybe there's a new deal that they really want to take advantage of, so they'll print off a coupon, right? And this is your online component now. They've completed that, and now they're going to the store with the coupon. So from the in-store purchase, it looks something like this. Visitor visits the store with their coupon. And now that they have the coupon, we actually know that it belongs to Andrew because he printed it off, and we know that what coupon this was printed off for, which user. And he uses that coupon to make a purchase, right? And then finally, the transaction concludes, and we have the complete cycle from online to offline interaction. So this is what we all know it happens today. How do we apply GA to this scenario to get that report where we see those two online and offline revenue come together, right? Well, the first thing you want to do is enable online measurement with the user ID, right? So this is the important part. When you sending hits to Google Analytics, you want to make sure that you set the user ID, this stable ID that you have, because you have an auth system and you've signed in, right? The second thing you want to do is, in the in-store side of things, from the point of sale, because we have the measurement protocol now, you can send hits from pretty much anywhere, including point of sale systems. So at that point, when you want to send, what you want to do is send the transaction to Google Analytics. You want to make sure you set the user ID in that situation. Now, the thing that's maybe not 100% obvious, but is important here is what the coupon actually accomplishes. The coupon is what actually ties these two things together. It allows us to encode the user ID into the coupon, for example, which we then can extract in the in-store purchase. Right? So this actually makes the connection. So let's look at number one, the step where we want to do online measurement with the ID. So you've seen this before. It's the same as what Andrew showed you. Because you have an auth system, you want to get the user ID, and you want to set it when you send hits to Google Analytics. The second step is the in-store purchase. So again, we have the measurement protocol. At that time, we want to make sure we set the user ID to the same ID that we had from the online purchase, or the online coupon, when they printed that. And we want to send the transaction value when it actually takes place, right? So this will actually tie the offline purchase back to that online interaction and going back all the way to the campaign. So that was retail, but it's just not retail, right? You can use this for a lot of different things. If you have a loyalty card, that gives you a nice stable ID that you can use for these different channels. Memberships, tickets, all these things you can encode these user IDs into. And then at the time of redemption or the offline interaction, you can get that user ID back out and pass it along to GA with the hit. So that was user ID. Let's look at client ID. So maybe if you don't have an auth system or you don't have a way to get a stable ID across different channels, we do have the client ID. That's the ID that's generated by Google Analytics. So if we look at this scenario, it's a kind of a test drive scenario where you're interested in a car and you want to book a test drive or you want some more information about the car. So the same scenario, you have an anonymous ID user that comes to the site. They might do a little bit of research about the car and what they're looking for might not be there, and they'll fill out a form, and that form will get submitted to a CRM system, so customer relationship management system, and within there it'll generate a lead. Okay, so that's the online component of this scenario. Then you have the car salesman, and this guy looks very familiar to Nick. comes along, and he grabs that lead out of the CRM system, and he calls up the customer. And he talks to him, and he's really good at what he does, so he convinces the guy to book a test drive. And that's all he does. All he does is just book test drives, Nick. And once he's done that, he indicates in the CRM system, okay, we move this prospect or customer from a new lead to a booked event, right? So this customer's gone through this conversion. So how do we apply analytics to this to make sure that we can connect this offline test drive booked component back to that online behavior that initially got him to the site, and what research that they may have done before that? So in this case, to implement Google Analytics, you want to make sure that you have analytics implemented on the site in general. So across all the site, you should have analytics installed. The second thing we want to do is send the client ID with the form post. So we need a way to get that client ID out of the tracker, so the Google Analytics ID that's provided, and then we need to send that to the CRM system so that it can be saved within the lead. Right? And then from the CRM's perspective, when the test drive is actually booked, we need to get that ID and then send a hit back to Google Analytics using that same client ID. So let's see how that looks. Let's see how the first step looks. So for the form itself, we want to submit the client ID with the form. So we need to add a new field to the form. In this case, the ID is client ID, but it could be any ID, whatever of your choosing. The important thing is that the form element is hidden, and we're going to use this to set the value for the client ID when the form gets posted. So we have this new element. And then we add a listener to the form for when it gets submitted. Because we want to know, once that form gets submitted, we want to grab the client ID from the tracker, and we want to send it to the CRM system with the actual lead gen. So the way we do that is we have a method and a mechanism to allow you to pull the client ID out of the tracker. So that first line there, the blue line, is how we get that. So once you have the value, then you want to set the value of the input element for the form to that client ID. Right? That way, when the form gets submitted, that value will be sent along. And then finally, we just want to send an event to Google Analytics to indicate that there is a new lead gen. And that's going to use the client ID that's part of the track already, so it's going to be associated with that particular user's interactions. Now, the second part is we want to send another event to Google Analytics from the CRM system to indicate that this user has booked with us for a test drive. And that one, it's measurement protocol, which is very simple. At this time, we just want to make sure we pull out the client ID that we saved in the CRM system, that same ID, and we send it along with the hit to indicate that there was an event where the test drive was actually booked. And that will tie back all of that interaction across from the online to the offline CRM system back into Google Analytics, and you'll have that view of that full path. All right, just to wrap up things here. The important thing here is we want to make that connection, right? So if you're doing online to offline, you use that connection, you use the user ID or a client ID to make that connection, and that's important. Once you have that connection, then you're able to attribute offline interactions to online campaigns and online interactions. Right? And once you have that, then you're able to optimize for the complete story. So now I'll pass it along to Nick. He's going to finish up.
Thanks, Pete. And Andrew, that was really exciting. I don't know about you guys, but this is pretty amazing. We covered 3 big things today. We talked about how Google Analytics is enabling every developer here who's building an application to now use Google Analytics to really measure usage. We talked about the beautiful reports of how you can now optimize across devices and how this will enable you to make better decisions of how you're building your apps. And finally, we talked about getting the true value of your marketing campaigns by tying the offline and online experiences together, all using Google Analytics. So there's a couple key things here of when this stuff's available. The measurement protocol is available now. What that means is everybody here after this session should go look at our developer docs and implement Google Analytics in your applications. The second thing is user ID. That's coming soon. Subscribe to our Google Analytics Plus channel, and we'll announce when it's available for trusted testers. Finally, all our developer documentations on developers.google.com analytics. If you haven't been there, shame on you. Go there after this session. Finally, come see us in after hours where we'll be answering questions. Thanks a lot for your time, guys.
That's the water. That's the water there.